Hello everyone, welcome back to Eat Sleep Brief. Today I'm covering an interesting topic today in regards to nitrates and phosphates. So these are actually one of the very important parameters in our reef tank, and it's very important that we keep a close eye on them and we keep them in balance. It's not good enough that we keep them at zero. It's not good enough that we keep them, at a certain number that's too high, too low. There's always a right number that they need to be at, and I call that balanced. So in our tanks, in a nutshell, we got nitrates and phosphates. Anytime we feed the tank, anytime the fish, coral poop, they release bacteria that's either broken down by your biological filtration. Sometimes your mechanical will grab it, sometimes the skimmer will grab it, but if it's not taken out of the tank, it'll break down into nitrates and phosphates. Now there's a few other elements, but in the majority it's really only nitrates and phosphates. So you have to figure out a way to export these. So obviously for you guys that do water changes, you can kind of keep up with it through water changes, but even then water changes can't really export them that well, because you got to think of it. If we're doing water changes every 2 to 3 weeks, only doing 10%, we're just diluting those nitrates and phosphates by 10%. So unless within those 2 weeks we're increasing them by 10%, you can find out where we're going to have an issue. So there's a few other things that you can use to combat nitrates and phosphates. Today we're going to kind of be showing you guys how I do it. This is not saying it's the wrong way, it's not saying it's the right way. This is just my way of showing you how I've been doing it for the 1.5 years this tank has been running. So follow along, hopefully you guys learned something new, and yeah, let's get right to it. So one of the things to kind of start, we're going to kind of start here from the ground up, kind of reverse engineer it in a way, do it a little bit different than maybe you guys have seen. So the first thing you guys want to make sure is always good in your tank is your sand bed. Now I have a sand sifter goby that does a very good job of turning over the sand. Not only that, through the Jager I have, sometimes it'll start moving the sand on the left side and start moving it over to the right. So what I'll do every week, I'll refill it or throw the sand back to the left. But kind of what I'll do, whatever the goby doesn't do, I actually like stirring up the sand. Now you want to be very careful with this. If it is going to be part of something you're going to be doing, it needs to be something you do routinely, because in the sand there's really bad gases that can build up, really bad stuff that can build up. So you don't want to go and stir your whole sand bed. If you are going to be doing it and you haven't stirred your sand bed in a long time, just do little patches at a time. For my tank, I stir it up quite often, so I'll do the whole front panel 1 week, the whole back panel the next week, and just really allows me to keep the sand bed clean, keep any dust, any bad stuff out of the sand bed, as well as do any or catch anything the goby doesn't catch. So that's one of the first things I like to look for in my tank, to because a lot of buildup, a lot of detritus, a lot of nitrates and phosphates can get in your sand, and thus be slowly released over time. So this is one way I put them up in the water column, kind of get them out of the way, back to the mechanical, biological filtration, so that can be addressed. One of the other things I like to cover is flow. It's very important you have adequate flow in your tank. I'm running a Jager 230 as well as a PP4. Between both of these guys, the flow in my tank is unreal. I mean, it's a lot of people will call it high flow tank. In my eyes, it's allowed me to keep a very clean tank with really very little to no issues at all. So it's very important we have the proper flow in the tank. Again, because once you get the stuff suspended in the water column, it'll essentially make its way back to your filtration. So it can either be mechanically or biologically broken down. A lot of times the skimmer will catch a lot of it. So yeah, flow is a very important thing. So giving you guys a little bit rundown of what my sump looks like. So this is kind of going to be a little bit more in detail of how my sump runs, my whole filtration. And this is really what's pretty much in charge of keeping low nitrates and phosphates in my tank. So starting off here is the mechanical filtration. So here you guys can see the water overflows into filter floss. It then goes through a 200 micron pad, which is captured there. Underneath that we have some pod matrix. After that, it's going to flow into the next chamber where you guys can see this is where I keep the skimmer. It's a PLS 50 skimmer by Cadlights. It's the 2nd generation, and I mean I don't think I need to talk much about it. You guys can see it's doing an amazing job of skimming. But it's very important you have a great skimmer, because anything that stays suspended in the water column and isn't captured mechanically or biologically the skimmer will easily come in and pick it up, as you guys can see here. So this is one of the best ways to export nutrients out of the tank, really allowing you to keep the nitrates and phosphates down. Following that, I have my return pump. So it's kind of hard to see. It is the Jebao return pump. This pump has been absolutely great. It produces a lot of flow. I'm actually running this tank at higher return flow rate than it runs stock. Actually about 2 times faster, which is quite a bit. But I think this has been a big culprit of running a clean system, because again, once I get all the bad stuff suspended in the water, it very easily makes its way back to the filtration, which allows everything to really break it down. So it's very important you guys have a great return pump. Mine here is DC. Again, it is the Jebao, and I really haven't had any issues with it. So that's a very, very important thing to have in your tank. The next thing, this is more geared towards phosphates. So the number one media to really eradicate phosphates is going to be granular ferric oxide, also known as GFO. GFO I run in my tank here. You can see in a reactor. What this thing does, it pretty much grabs water from the surrounding area, forces it through the reactor, which thus is going to force the water through the media, being GFO, thus exporting the phosphates in the water. So typically I try to shoot for 0.03 in my tank. And that's kind of what you want to be shooting for. You don't want 0, you don't want too high, because then your corals will suffer in both ways, believe it or not. Typically with too low of phosphates, you'll lose color. Too high of phosphates, you'll kind of also lose color, specifically in SPS coral. So there really is a happy medium we need to be shooting for. The next thing I do have here on the left side, you can see I have mechanical, but I have carbon I'm running in a bag. And the carbon is in charge of really just cleaning up the water. It doesn't attack nitrates and phosphates directly, a little bit more indirectly, maybe nitrates a little bit. But this I really use to keep the water clean, keep everything nice, and it really breaks up any bad bacteria or any bad stuff in the water that shouldn't be in there. One of my last things I have here, you guys can see, is my Jager reactor. Now this by far is the number one culprit for me running a successful reef tank. There's a lot of refugiums, Jager refugiums out there you guys will see, but I think by far a Jager reactor is the most effective. It'll grow it 3 to 4 times faster than a refugium. So that being said, I believe it essentially will reduce nitrates and phosphates 3 times faster than anything else. Not to mention it's natural. So if you guys are going for a more natural reduction of nitrates and phosphate, this is great. It doesn't do too well with phosphates. I mean, it will export them kind of quickly, but the GFO, that's the reason I'm running a GFO reactor, because it kind of needs both of them working together to really export all the bad stuff. So the next thing we are going to talk about, there's 2 types of GFO that I run and that I trust. Number 1 being Aquamax. Aquamax makes their GFO, you guys can see here. I've had 0 complaints on this stuff whatsoever. It does a very good job. It's GFO in general is very expensive, but this one here is priced pretty well, and it's done a great job. The only complaint I have versus running the GFO from Aquamax to the ROAFOS is the ROAFOS is there. It's thicker media. So when putting it through a reactor, you typically don't see any dust flying around in the reactor. It takes also a lot less rinsing. And again, the GFO is just a lot more compacted down. So if you have the money, this is, I guess, pretty much what I'm going to say. If you have the money to buy the ROAFOS, get the ROAFOS. It's a lot better media. It absorbs about 4 times more than GFO will before it essentially fills up. So I'd highly recommend you going with the ROAFOS. If you're a little bit more on a budget, or you just can't get your hands on ROAFOS, by all means, this Aquamax stuff works really good. And this is what I've been using in my tank. I've ran them both, and both of them do a lot, are really great. Other than obviously the ROAFOS last me a little bit longer. So that covers that. The next thing we're gonna be covering is the carbon I run. You can see here, this is a ROX carbon by Aquamax. No complaints with this stuff. It does a very good job. And all in all, just a great carbon. Now, one of the last things I do run in the tank to help it reduce nitrates and phosphates a little bit more triggered towards nitrates, again, is going to be NoPox. You guys can see here from Red Sea is something I started using at the beginning, but I've actually completely shut it off now that my Jebao reactor has completely taken over. Believe it or not, I've actually had to add fish in the tank and feed heavier to get readings of nitrates. I have very, very low readings. I went out this week and bought like 3 fish. The chromis, as you guys can see, swimming around. And this was all done to, again, get a reading on nitrates. I do know there's a little bit in there, but I want a little bit more. Why? I actually want a little bit better coloration. So NoPox is something you can use. There's a few things with NoPox. You kind of got to have a skimmer because it's going to take oxygen out of the water. And some people say you need to do frequent water changes with it, that you can't go water change less using it. I haven't had issues. Is that saying it's the right thing? No, I'm just telling you my personal experience. So NoPox is something you can either manual dose or auto dose. I went the auto dosing route, and it's been, pretty good, other than, like I said, now I've taken it completely offline. So that's gonna pretty much wrap up today's video, guys. Hopefully I didn't lose you guys. Hopefully you guys were able to follow along and see how I really go ahead and combat nitrates and phosphates. You can see I do a lot of it through media. The Jebao reactor does its best to do it naturally. And I've actually had to start dialing back the hours of the light for the Jebao. Why? Because I want to get more nitrates in the water. So I'm actually running it less because it's running too effective, and thus I've had to buy more fish to hopefully they can put more nitrates in the water. So, this is just my way I've been doing it. I've had great success, as you guys can see here with this tank. Parameters have been very steady. And also, one big thing I want to mention to you guys, I come across this all the time. If you are going to start testing nitrates and phosphates, please guys, buy good test kits. Buy good test kits. If you're testing phosphates, get the HANA Checker ultra low phosphorus reader. Nothing else. If you're testing nitrates, get the Red Sea Pro test kit. Because you don't know how many people I've had chasing a number, the test kit wasn't even that accurate. So if you are going to be, dialing something in, you want to make sure you're using the best of the best as far as the test kit. So once again, if you're doing phosphates, get the HANA Checker. Phosphorus, not the phosphate, the phosphorus, because it measures a lot lower. And for nitrates, get the Red Sea Nitrate Pro test kit. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks for watching. Till next time.